What's up, legends? Tonight we're diving into a story that will shatter everything you think you know about bastards in Westeros. Everyone talks about Jon Snow, the noble bastard who became king in the north. Some mention Ramsay Bolton, the sadistic monster who terrorized the Starks. But they've got it all wrong. The real biggest bastard in Westeros, he wielded the sword of Aegon the Conqueror. He looked more royal than kings. Half the realm went to war for him, not against him. His rebellion didn't just shake the Seven Kingdoms, it scarred them for over a century. 5 wars, 64 years of blood, hundreds of thousands dead, all because of one man's choice. This bastard was born in scandal so shocking, it literally killed a king. He was knighted at 12 years old, the youngest in history. He was given a gift that should have gone to the heir to the Iron Throne, and when he finally raised his banner in rebellion, the realm split perfectly in half. Picture the Battle of Redgrass Field, tens of thousands of men clashing, the fate of the Seven Kingdoms hanging by a thread. This bastard cuts through the enemy like a god of war, unstoppable, magnificent, seconds away from claiming the crown. Then from 300 yards away, in the chaos of battle, arrows fly. He falls. His twin sons rush to protect his body. They fall too, 3 generations dead in moments. But here's the twist. His cause didn't die with him. His sword vanished, never to be found. His surviving sons fled across the narrow sea and spent their entire lives fighting to reclaim what their father lost. Their sons did the same, and their sons after them. The greatest sellsword company in the world was founded in his name and exists to this very day, still loyal to a dream that died over a century ago. This is about destiny versus birth, about whether a bastard can be more legitimate than a true-born king, about honor becoming a fatal flaw, about one arrow changing the course of history forever. So before we begin this journey into the greatest bastard story ever told, take a moment to like this video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy deep Westeros lore. Let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what you think makes someone legitimate to rule. It's always fascinating to hear your perspectives. Now settle in, get comfortable, maybe adjust your volume for the perfect level, and let's uncover the legend of the man they called the Black Dragon, the king who bore the sword. The bastard who nearly broke the wheel centuries before Daenerys ever dreamed of it. This is the story of Daemon Blackfyre. Our story begins in the years following the Dance of the Dragons, that catastrophic Targaryen civil war that nearly destroyed the dynasty. By 170 AC, the realm was still recovering, the dragons were gone or dying. The Iron Throne's authority was being rebuilt stone by stone, and the Targaryen kings who followed were trying desperately to restore the glory that had been lost. But some wounds never truly heal. Some cracks in the foundation only grow deeper with time. King's Landing in this era was a city of contradictions. The Red Keep still dominated the skyline, its red stone walls holding centuries of secrets. Dragonstone loomed across Blackwater Bay, ancient and imposing. The Great Sept of Backlaw, newly built, stood as a monument to faith and piety, but beneath the grandeur, corruption festered. The king during our story's beginning was Badler the Blessed, a man so devoted to the Seven that he nearly destroyed his own family. Badler believed the world was too sinful, too corrupted by desires of the flesh, so he made a decision that would echo through history. He locked away his 3 sisters, Daena, Rhaena, and Eliana, in a place called the Maiden Vault, beautiful princesses, daughters of kings, imprisoned to protect them from the so-called lusts of men. But you cannot cage a dragon. Princess Daena Targaryen was different from her sisters. History remembers her as Daena the Defiant, and she earned that name. She had once been married to her own brother Baelor, but he annulled the marriage in his religious fervor. She was strong-willed, beautiful, fierce, and absolutely refused to accept her imprisonment. She escaped the Maiden Vault multiple times, slipping past guards, finding ways out that shouldn't have existed. And during one of these escapes, she met her cousin. Prince Aegon Targaryen was everything his brother Baelor was not. Where Baelor was pious, Aegon was lustful. Where Baelor denied himself pleasure, Aegon indulged in every vice. Aegon was married to his sister Nyria's, but he never let marriage vows stop him from taking what he wanted. He had mistresses throughout the realm, 9 official mistresses over his lifetime, and countless others whose names were never recorded. But Dataena was different. She was a Targaryen princess, his own cousin, forbidden in every way, and that made her irresistible. Their liaison was kept secret, in the shadows of King's Landing, away from Baelor's prying eyes, away from the judgments of court. They came together. And in late 170 AC, the consequences of that union became impossible to hide. Dataena was pregnant. The scandal rocked the Red Keep. A princess of the blood, locked away for her own protection, somehow with child. Battler demanded to know the father's identity. The court whispered and speculated, but Dataena refused to name him. Her lips remained sealed. She would not give them the satisfaction. Though in truth, everyone already knew Prince Aegon's involvement was suspected from the beginning. The way he looked at her, the timing, the whispers of servants who had seen things they shouldn't have seen. In the final months of 170 AC, in a chamber of the Red Keep, Princess Danyna gave birth to a son. She named him Danienon, after her grandfather Prince Danienon Targaryen, the rogue prince who had been both the wonder and terror of his age. Even in naming her bastard son Danyna was making a statement. This child was destined for greatness or destruction, perhaps both. Daemon Waters, as bastards born in the Crownlands were called, a name that marked him as less than as illegitimate as outside the line of succession. But when the midwives cleaned the baby and brought him into the light, they gasped. Perfect Valyrian features, eyes like purple amethysts, hair that would grow silver gold, shimmering in the sun. He looked every inch a Targaryen prince, more so, some would whisper, than many of the legitimate heirs. And when King Baelor the Blessed heard of the birth, he began to fast. 40 days, he said, 40 days of bread and water to atone for this sin brought into the world. On the 41st day, Bella collapsed before the altar of the mother and died. The infant Daemon Waters had in a sense killed a king before he could even speak. Baelor the Blessed starved himself to death out of shame for the bastard's existence. The realm mourned their pious king, but the whispers in the taverns and brothels told a different story. They said Baelor was a fool who valued prayer over family, faith over blood. And they said the baby born of Daemon's defiance carried something special in his veins. Daemon's early years remain somewhat shrouded in mystery, but we know he was raised within the Red Keep itself. This was unusual for a bastard. Most were sent away, hidden from court, given to lesser families to raise in obscurity. But Daemon stayed. Perhaps Daemon insisted. Perhaps Prince Aegon, though he would not publicly claim the boy yet, wanted him close. Whatever the reason, this bastard child grew up surrounded by the trappings of royalty he could never officially claim. After Bannerlor's death, the crown passed to Viserys II, Danaena's uncle. Viserys ruled for just a year before his own death, and then the throne went to the man everyone knew was Daemon's father. Prince Aegon became King Aegon IV in 172 AC. History would remember him as Aegon the Unworthy, and that title was earned through years of corruption, gluttony, and cruelty. Aegon IV was everything a king should not be. He was unfaithful to his wife Queen Nerys, flaunting his mistresses openly at court. He was corrupt, selling positions and titles to the highest bidder. He grew so fat in his later years that he could barely walk. He played cruel games with his children, legitimate and bastard alike, pitting them against each other for his amusement. But there was one bastard who captured his attention above all others: Daemon. As the boy grew, it became impossible to ignore what he was becoming. Tall, even as a child, strong beyond his years. And those features, those unmistakable Targaryen features, seemed to intensify with age. His purple eyes were striking, the kind that made people stop and stare. His hair grew long and silver, catching the light like molten metal. He moved with a natural grace that suggested both nobility and danger. King Aegon watched his bastard son with something approaching fascination. Here was a boy who embodied everything Aegon valued: strength, beauty, the look of old Valyria perfected. Meanwhile, his legitimate son and heir, Prince Darien, was everything Aegon despised. Darien was bookish, preferring scrolls to swords. He was gentle where Aegon valued ferocity. And most damning of all, in Aegon's eyes, Darien looked Dornish. He had the dark hair and darker complexion of his mother, Myria Martell. The king began spreading a vicious rumor, one that would poison the realm for generations. He whispered that Darren was not his son at all, that Queen Nerys had been unfaithful with her own brother, Aemon the Dragon Knight, the greatest knight of the age, that the boy who would inherit the Iron Throne was himself a bastard, while the true dragon blood flowed through Daremon's veins. Whether this was true, or simply Aegon's cruelty, we will never know. Daenerys and Aemon both died years before, taking their secrets to the grave. But the rumor stuck. It infected the minds of lords and commoners alike, and it gave weight to a dangerous idea. What if the bastard was more legitimate than the heir? Daemon's education was comprehensive, another oddity for someone of his birth. Maesters taught him history, the rise and fall of kingdoms, the mistakes of past rulers. He learned the languages of the free cities. He studied law and governance, subjects meant for princes, not bastards. But it was in the training yard where Daemon truly excelled. His master-at-arms was Ser Quentyn Ball, a knight of fearsome reputation. They called him Fireball for his red hair and his explosive temper. Quentyn was a brilliant swordsman and a harsh teacher. He saw something in young Daemon that excited him. Raw talent, yes, but also discipline. The boy never complained, never shirked from the hardest drills. He absorbed every lesson like a sponge, soaking up water. By the time Daemon reached 10 years old, he was already beating boys 4 and 5 years older in the practice yard. He mastered the sword first, then the lance, then the axe and the flail. Each weapon became an extension of his body. But it was with the sword that he transcended mere skill and approached artistry. Watching him fight, even in practice, was watching something beautiful and terrifying. The other bastards at court watched Daemon's rise with varying reactions. Aegor Rivers, son of Aegon and Barbara Bracken, was just 2 years younger than Daemon. He was a fierce boy himself, ambitious and proud. He attached himself to Daemon early, seeing in him a path to glory. Aegor would grow into the man called Bittersteel, and his loyalty to Daemon would never waver. Brynden Rivers, born in 175 AC to Aegon and Melissa Blackwood, was different. An albino with red eyes and a white birthmark that looked like a raven. He was called Blood Raven from childhood. He was sickly compared to Daemon, bookish like Prince Daeron, more interested in secrets and sorcery than swordplay. Even as children, there was tension between Bloodraven and the others. He watched everything with those strange red eyes, absorbing information, calculating. Then there was Shiera Seastar, born in 178 AC, daughter of Aegon and Serene of Lys. She would grow into perhaps the most beautiful woman in the 7 Kingdoms, with mismatched eyes of blue and green. Both Aegon and Brynden would fall in love with her, and her indifference to both would fuel a hatred between the half-brothers that would shape the realm's future. But in these early years, it was Daemon who stood at the center. Daemon who drew the eye. Daemon who seemed destined for something greater than the name Waters allowed. And then came the year 182 AC. A squire's tourney was announced in King's Landing, a chance for boys on the cusp of knighthood to prove their worth. Daemon was 12 years old. Most squires who competed were 14, 15, even 16. But Daemon begged Sir Quentyn to let him enter. Fireball agreed, curious to see how his student would perform against older, more experienced opponents. The tourney began on a bright morning. Hundreds gathered to watch. These were not the grand melees of true knights, but the contests were real enough. Boys fought with blunted weapons, but bones still broke. Pride was still on the line. Daemon entered the lists wearing simple armor, no device or colors to mark him, just another bastard trying to make a name. His first opponent was a squire from the Stormlands, 3 years older and half again as heavy. The boy charged with confidence, expecting an easy victory. Daemon dismounted him in a single pass. The lance struck true, the older boy flying from his saddle to crash into the dirt. The crowd murmured. Luck, perhaps. The second bout proved it was not luck. Daemon faced a Riverland squire, tall and skilled with a blade. In the sword combat portion, Daemon moved like quicksilver. Every attack was parried, every opening exploited. Within minutes, the Riverlands boy yielded, nursing a bruised shoulder and damaged pride. Match after match, Daemon advanced. By the final rounds, the crowd was no longer murmuring. They were cheering. This unknown boy, this bastard child, was dominating opponents who should have crushed him. His technique was flawless. His stamina seemed endless. And there was something else, something harder to name. A presence, a sense that you were watching someone touched by destiny. The final match lasted longer. His opponent was a Western squire, 16 years old, already massive with muscle. They fought with tourney swords, and the clash of steel rang across the yard. Back and forth they went, neither giving ground. The crowd held its breath. Then Daemon saw his opening. A feint high, a strike low, the Western boy's leg buckled. He went down to one knee and yielded. Daemon Waters, at 12 years old, stood victorious. The crowd erupted. They had witnessed something special, a champion born. And sitting on the raised platform, watching with eyes that gleamed with satisfaction, was King Aegon the Fourth. What happened next would change everything. The king rose from his seat, massive and imposing despite his growing girth. He descended the steps and walked onto the tourney ground. The crowd fell silent, sensing something momentous. Aegon called for a sword, not a practice blade, but a real weapon. He commanded Daemon to kneel. The boy obeyed, confusion and hope warring on his young face. And there, before hundreds of witnesses, King Aegon the Fourth personally knighted Daemon Waters. At 12 years old, he became the youngest knight in the entire history of House Targaryen, younger even than Maga the Cruel, who had held that record for generations. But Aegon was not finished. He called for another sword to be brought forth, and when the servants arrived carrying a long wooden case, the crowd began to understand. They began to realize what they were about to witness. The case was opened. Inside, resting on red velvet, lay a blade of Valyrian steel. Ripples of dark smoke and red ran through the metal. The hilt was wrapped in dragon bone and leather. Rubies glinted in the crossguard. Blackfire, the sword of Aegon the Conqueror, the blade that had been carried by every Targaryen king for nearly 200 years. The physical symbol of the monarchy itself. Aegon lifted the sword. The weight of history hung in the air. By all rights, by all tradition, This sword should go to the heir to Prince Daeron. It had always passed from king to eldest son. But Aegon turned to his bastard, to Daemon, and he placed Blackfire in the boy's hands. The silence was absolute. Then, chaos. Some cheered, caught up in the moment. Others stood in shock, understanding the implications. Prince Daeron, watching from the stands, went pale as death. Queen Naerys wept openly. The members of the small council exchanged horrified glances. Aegon IV had just declared, without words but with perfect clarity, who he believed should inherit the throne, not his legitimate son, his bastard. Daemon stood holding Blackfire, and in that moment the name Waters no longer seemed to fit. He looked every inch a king, young, yes, still growing into his full height and strength, but already magnificent, already dangerous, already everything a Targaryen was supposed to be. From that day forward he was known as Daemon Blackfire. The sword had given him a new name, a new identity, and whether he knew it or not, a new destiny. The seed was planted, the realm watched, and the question that would eventually tear the Seven Kingdoms apart had been asked for the first time. Who was the real heir to the Iron Throne? The years following the knighting ceremony transformed Daemon from a promising boy into something far more dangerous, a legend in the making. He was now Daemon Blackfire, the youngest knight in living memory, wielder of the Conqueror's sword, and the realm could not stop talking about him. He trained relentlessly under Sarah Quentin Ball. Every morning began before dawn in the practice yard. Fireball was not a gentle teacher. He believed that sweat in training meant less blood in battle. Daemon absorbed punishment that would have broken other boys. Bruises, split lips, aching muscles became his constant companions. But he never complained, never asked for mercy. Pain was just another teacher, and Daemon was an eager student. By the time he reached 15, Daemon had mastered every weapon in the armory. The morning star that could crush armor with a single blow. The war axe that required perfect balance and timing. The flail, perhaps the most difficult weapon to control, became fluid in his hands. He could fight from horseback or on foot with equal skill. But always, it was the sword where he transcended. With Blackfire in his hands, Daemon became something else entirely. The Valyrian steel seemed to sing as it cut through the air. His movements were economical, precise, beautiful in their efficiency. Other knights began requesting permission to watch his training sessions. They would stand along the edges of the yard, silent and respectful, witnessing a master at work. Some of these knights were twice his age, veterans of real wars, and yet they watched this teenager with something close to awe. Tourneys across the Seven Kingdoms began to feature a new champion. Daemon traveled to the Reach, to the Stormlands, to the Riverlands, entering every competition he could find, and he won, again and again and again. Lords offered their daughters in marriage. Knights offered their swords in service. Common folk began calling him the warrior himself, come to earth. But Daemon's life was not just martial excellence. He was being groomed for something, though exactly what remained unspoken. The Maesters continued his education. He learned the histories of every great house, their words, their allegiances, their ancient grudges. He studied the economics of the realm, how trade flowed, where wealth accumulated, where poverty festered. He learned statecraft, the delicate art of negotiation and compromise. All of this was unusual for a bastard. It was the education of a prince, and everyone at court noticed. The other great bastards grew alongside Daemon, each developing their own distinct character. Aegon Rivers, who men would eventually call Bittersteel, became Daemon's shadow. Where Daemon went, Aegon followed. He was shorter than Daemon, but powerfully built, with the dark hair of his Bracken mother and eyes that burned with ambition. Aegon loved Daemon, with a fierce, almost desperate loyalty. In Daemon he saw his own path to glory. A bastard could never inherit by law, but with Daemon perhaps law could be changed. Bittersteel made himself indispensable. He organized Daemon's household, managed his finances, recruited knights to his service. He was the practical hand to Daemon's martial excellence, and more than that, he whispered in Daemon's ear, constantly, about rights that had been denied, about thrones that belonged to the worthy, not just the firstborn, about destiny waiting to be seized. Brynden Rivers took a different path entirely. Bloodraven, as everyone called him, remained apart from Daemon's circle. His albinism made him stand out in any crowd, a pale ghost among vibrant courtiers. He was sickly as a child, prone to fevers and coughing fits, but his mind was sharp as any blade. He consumed books on history, on poisons, on the properties of dragonglass and wildfire, dark subjects for a dark boy. Most significantly, Bloodraven began to show an aptitude for gathering information. Servants talked to him, stable boys confided in him. He seemed to know everyone's secrets, every scandal before it became public knowledge. He aligned himself firmly with Prince Daeron, the legitimate heir, perhaps seeing that as the safer path, or perhaps he genuinely believed in the principle of legitimate succession. With Bloodraven, motivations were always murky. The tension between Bloodraven and Bittersteel grew as they aged. Part of it was philosophical disagreement about Daemon's future. Part of it was their fundamental differences in temperament, but much of it would eventually stem from Shiera Seastar. Shiera was younger than her half-brothers, but as she grew into womanhood, she became impossible to ignore. Stories of her beauty spread across the realm. She had inherited the exotic looks of her Lysene mother, combined with Targaryen features. Her eyes were her most striking feature, one deep blue, the other bright green. Men said that looking into those mismatched eyes was like being caught in a spell. Both Bloodraven and Bittersteel fell in love with her. Both pursued her openly at court, and Shiera, whether from genuine indifference or calculated manipulation, gave neither what they wanted. She would dance with Bloodraven one night, smile at Bittersteel the next, but commit to neither. The rivalry between the two half-brothers became poisonous, feeding on jealousy and wounded pride. Daemon himself seemed above these petty conflicts. He was focused on something larger. His reputation continued to grow, not just as a warrior, but as a man of honor. Stories circulated about his fairness in judgment when disputes were brought to him, about his generosity to small folk, about his courtesy to highborn ladies, and his respect for defeated opponents. This was crucial. Daemon was not building the reputation of a sellsword or a hedge knight. He was building the reputation of a king. Whether consciously or unconsciously, everything he did added to that image. The warrior king, the just ruler, the man who embodied everything the song said a Targaryen should be. Meanwhile, King Aegon IV continued his descent into legendary debauchery. His mistresses came and went. His corruption deepened. His body swelled with gluttony until he could barely move without assistance. And all the while, he played his cruel game, comparing his bastard sons to his legitimate one, always to Prince Daeron's disadvantage. The court split into factions. Those who supported Prince Daeron's claim by law and tradition, and those who believed Daeron represented something better, even if that something challenged every principle of inheritance the realm was built upon. The divide was not yet violent, but it was real and growing. Daemon's household expanded, knights sworn to him personally, rather than to the crown. Servants loyal to House Blackfire, a house that did not technically exist. He needed lands of his own, a seat to rule from, and King Aegon, ever indulgent of his favorite bastard, granted him an estate along the Blackwater Rush. Good land, fertile and valuable. Daemon was given permission to build there, to create something permanent. The foundation of a dynasty. That's what it was, though no one said it aloud. Daemon Blackfyre, not yet 20 years old, was being positioned as an alternative to the throne. Not a threat, not yet, but a possibility, a backup plan, or perhaps, in Aegon's twisted mind, the real plan all along. Then came the year 184 AC. Daemon was 14 years old, and King Aegon IV, massive and diseased, corrupt and cruel to the very end, lay dying in his bed. His final act would dwarf all his previous sins. It would be remembered as the moment one bad king condemned the realm to a century of blood. Aegon called for his scribes. He dictated his final royal decree, and with his last official act as king, Aegon the Unworthy legitimized every one of his bastard children. All of them, not just Daemon, not just Bittersteel and Bloodraven and Shiera, but every bastard he had ever acknowledged, and there were many. Daemon Waters became Daemon Blackfyre by law, not just by reputation. Aegon Rivers and Brynden Rivers gained the legal rights of true-born sons. Then Aegon died, and Prince Daeron became King Daeron II. The new king faced an impossible situation. He had just inherited a throne that half the realm questioned was rightfully his, and standing in the wings was his half-brother, now legally legitimized, carrying the sword of kings, beloved by thousands, and looking far more like a Targaryen than Daeron himself. Daeron was not a fool. He understood the danger immediately, but he was also not his father. Where Aegon would have responded with violence, Daeron chose a different path. He would try to bind Daemon to him, through kindness and obligation. The new king honored his father's promise to pay a dowry to the Archon of Tyrosh. The dowry had been arranged for Daemon's marriage to Rohan, a noblewoman from that free city. Daeron could have refused, claimed the old king's debts, died with him. But instead he paid in full and personally blessed the marriage. Daemon wed Rohan of Tyrosh in a ceremony, attended by half the court. She was beautiful, well-educated, from a wealthy family, a good match by any standard, and by the end of their first year together, Rohan gave Daemon twin sons. They were named Aegon and Aemon, after Targaryen kings and princes, two healthy boys with purple eyes and silver hair. Daeron went further. He granted Daeron more lands, enough to support a large household. He showered him with honors and appointments. He treated him, publicly at least, as a beloved brother rather than a threat. And for a time, it seemed to work. Daemon settled into his new life. Married, landed, legitimized. He had everything a man could want, except the one thing he had never asked for, but that everyone insisted should be his: the throne. Years passed in relative peace. Daemon's family grew. More sons were born. His household expanded into something resembling a small court. Knights continued to flock to his service, but he remained loyal to King Daeron, fought in his wars, attended his councils when summoned, played the role of faithful subject. But beneath the surface, pressure was building. Because the question had been asked, and once asked, it could not be unasked. Who should rule? The legitimate son who might be a bastard, or the legitimized bastard who looked like the rightful heir? The realm held its breath and waited to see which question would win. Daeron II was everything his father was not, and the realm struggled to decide if that was a blessing or a curse. He was scholarly where Aegon had been brutish. He was faithful to his wife where Aegon had been flagrantly unfaithful. He was measured and thoughtful where Aegon had been impulsive and cruel. By every measure of personal virtue, Daeron was the better man. But virtue does not always translate to strength, and the Seven Kingdoms respected strength above all else. The early years of Daeron's reign focused on consolidation. He swept the court clean of his father's corrupt appointees, replacing them with men of actual competence. He reformed the treasury, bringing order to finances that Aegon had pillaged for personal pleasure. He patronized scholars and artists, turning the Red Keep into a center of learning it had not been in decades. These were good works, necessary works. Yet they did not inspire the kind of loyalty that Daemon commanded simply by walking into a room. Darragh had a vision for the realm that went beyond simple governance. For over a century and a half, Dorne had remained independent, a thorn in the Targaryen side. Aegon the Conqueror had failed to subdue them. The young dragon, Darragh I, had conquered Dorne briefly before being driven out at terrible cost. Generations of Targaryen kings had broken themselves against Dornish resistance. Daron II would succeed where warriors had failed. He would use diplomacy. His scheme was elegant in its simplicity. His own wife, Queen Moriah, was Dornish, a Martell princess. That marriage had already laid groundwork. Now Daru negotiated with his brother-in-law Prince Marin Martell. The terms were generous, perhaps too generous in the eyes of many lords. Dorne would join the Seven Kingdoms, but retain significant autonomy. They would keep their own laws, their own customs. Dornish troops would fight under their own commanders. The Prince of Dorne would retain his title, rather than being reduced to a mere lord. And to seal the pact, Prince Marin would marry Daron's sister, Princess Daenerys Targaryen. The announcement sent shockwaves through the realm. The Reach and Stormlands, who had bled fighting Dornish armies for generations, were furious. How could their enemies suddenly become their brothers? How could the blood debt be forgiven so easily? But Daron pushed forward, convinced that peace was worth any price. There was another problem, one that festered beneath the public outrage. Daemon Blackfyre had expected to marry Daenerys. Whether this was a genuine promise from his father, or wishful thinking on Daemon's part, remains unclear. Aegon the Unworthy had apparently told Daemon he could follow the example of Aegon the Conqueror and take multiple wives. Daemon already had Rohan of Tyrosh. True, but Daenerys was a Targaryen princess. Marrying her would have elevated him, given his sons an even stronger claim to royal blood. And according to some accounts, Daemon loved her, or at least believed he did. When Daron announced the Dornish marriage, Daemon said nothing publicly, but those close to him noted the change. A coldness that had not been there before, a distance that grew with each passing day. The wedding was planned for 187 AC, 3 years after Daron took the throne. It would be a grand affair, uniting two kingdoms that had been enemies since before living memory. A tourney would celebrate the occasion, drawing knights from across the realm and beyond. Daemon entered that tourney, carrying all his accumulated frustration. He had been the perfect subject. Loyal, obedient, never overstepping. And this was his reward. Watching the woman he believed should be his wed to a Dornish prince. All for politics, for peace, for Daeron's grand vision. The tourney became a showcase of barely controlled fury. Daemon cut through opponent after opponent with a ferocity that bordered on recklessness. He was not just winning, he was dominating, humiliating, making statements with every broken lance and every yielding knight. The crowd watched in awe and growing unease. This was not the courteous champion they had seen before. This was something darker. He reached the final tilt, and there he faced Prince Baelor Targaryen, Daron's eldest son and heir. They called him Breakspear, and he was a worthy opponent, skilled, strong, and just as determined to prove himself. The match became legendary. Two Targaryens, one legitimate and one bastard, fighting before the entire court. The symbolism was impossible to ignore. Lance after lance shattered. Both men held their seats through impacts that would have thrown lesser riders. The crowd roared with every pass. This was not just a joust. It was a statement about the future. about who had the strength to lead. In the final pass, Balor's lance struck true. Daemon was unhorsed, crashing to the ground in a clatter of armor. The crowd's roar reached a crescendo. Balor's had won, legitimate over bastard. The heir over the pretender. The message was clear, even if most did not yet realize they were receiving it. Daemon rose, accepted defeat with the grace expected of him, and congratulated his nephew. But everyone who knew him saw the truth in his eyes. Something had broken. Or perhaps something had been decided. The wedding proceeded. Princess Daenerys wed Prince Meryn. Dawn joined the Seven Kingdoms. Daeron's vision was realized, and Daeron returned to his lands along the Blackwater, nursing wounds that were more than physical. His wife Rohan understood, perhaps better than anyone, what her husband was going through. She had given him sons, 7 of them, by 196 AC. Strong boys, all with the Targaryen look. Aegon and Aemon were the eldest, twins born in 184 AC. Then came another Daemon in 189 AC, followed by Aegon around 191 AC, Aenys around 192 AC, and 2 more whose names history has forgotten, born in the years that followed. 7 sons, a dynasty in potentia. But what good were sons if they had no future beyond being landed knights? Rohan watched her husband grow more withdrawn, more troubled, and she watched the men who gathered around him, whispering in his ear about destiny and justice and rights denied. Bittersteel was the loudest voice. Adraga Rivers had grown into a formidable warrior in his own right. Though he would never match Daemon's brilliance, what he lacked in pure skill, he made up for in ruthless determination. He began building a faction around Daemon, carefully and quietly. Knights who felt overlooked by Daemon's court, lords who resented Dornish influence, ambitious men who saw opportunity in supporting an alternative. The Dornish issue became the rallying point for discontent. Everywhere Daeron went, Dornish customs followed. Dornish fashions became popular at court. Dornish advisors whispered in the king's ear. Prince Balon married a Dornish princess, Elia Martell. The Reach and Stormlands, traditional enemies of Dorne, watched this transformation with growing fury. And they looked at Daemon Blackfyre, a warrior, a conqueror, a man who embodied martial virtue rather than scholarly weakness. A man who would not have surrendered to Dorne but conquered them properly with fire and blood. The Whisper campaign began slowly. It was deniable at first, easy to dismiss as tavern talk and malcontent grumbling. But it grew, and it spread, and it always returned to the same points. Daeron was weak. Daemon was strong. Daeron looked Dornish. Daeron looked Valyrian. Daeron might not even be Aegon's true son. Daemon certainly was. Daeron was given the throne by law. Daeron was given the sword by the king himself. Which mattered more, law or merit, birth order or worthiness, the name you were born with or the name you earned? Daeron understood what was happening. His network of informants, led primarily by Bloodraven, kept him apprised of every whisper, every secret meeting, every knight who pledged himself to Daeron's household. But what could he do? Daemon had broken no laws. He attended court when summoned. He paid his taxes. He fulfilled his obligations. Arresting him would prove the Whisperers right, that Daeron feared his own brother, that the king was weak and paranoid. So Daeron tried a different approach. He showered Daeron with even more honors, invited him to join small council meetings, sought his advice on military matters, treated him as the beloved brother he desperately wanted him to be. But all the honors in the world could not erase what had been planted in Daemon's mind. The idea that he was settling for less than he deserved, that his sons were being denied their birthright, that the realm was suffering under weak leadership when strong leadership was available. 12 years passed this way, from 184 AC, when Daemon was legitimized, to 196 AC, when everything exploded. 12 years of mounting pressure, 12 years of whispered conversations and midnight oaths, 12 years of Daemon wrestling with loyalty and ambition, duty and destiny. His sons grew. The twins Aegon and Aemon reached 12 years old, the same age Daemon had been when knighted. They were training in their father's yard, learning from Sir Quentin Ball, becoming warriors in their own right. The younger boys followed their older brothers everywhere, worshipping them, dreaming of glory. What father could look at his 7 sons and not want to give them everything? What man, told his entire life he was special, chosen, destined, could accept being merely a lord when a throne sat within reach? The factions were forming. Lords taking sides, some openly, most in secret. The realm was dividing, and everyone knew it. The question was no longer if there would be a reckoning, but when, and whether Daemon would be the one to start it, or if he would be forced to respond to Daeron's action. In early 196 AC, the question was answered. Daeron's patience ran out, or perhaps Bloodraven convinced him that waiting was more dangerous than acting. Either way, the king made his move. He sent his Kingsguard to arrest Daemon Blackfyre on charges of treason and plotting rebellion. And with that single order, Daeron guaranteed the very rebellion he hoped to prevent. The die was cast. The realm would bleed, and the biggest bastard in Westerosi history was about to earn his title. Daemon Blackfyre was not born a rebel. For 12 years after his legitimization, he lived as a loyal subject. He attended court when summoned, paid his taxes, fought in Daeron's wars, but beneath this surface loyalty, forces were gathering that would eventually tear the realm apart. Bitter Steel understood what Daemon could not yet accept. Argo Rivers had spent those years traveling the 7 kingdoms, attending tournaments, visiting castles. Each journey was a recruitment mission disguised as courtesy. He identified grievances, cultivated relationships, planted seeds of doubt about Daeron's rule. The Reach became his strongest territory. These lords remembered generations of war against Dorne. Their fathers and grandfathers had died fighting Dornish spears. Now their king had married a Dornish princess, given Dorne favorable terms, elevated Dornish customs at court. To them it felt like those deaths had meant nothing. Bittersteel never spoke openly of rebellion. Instead, he asked questions. Was it not strange that Darien looked more Dornish than Targaryen? Had they heard the old rumors about Queen Nerians and Aemon the Dragon Knight? Why would Aegon the Fourth give Blackfyre to a bastard unless he intended that bastard to rule? Each conversation was treason, but only if you said the quiet part aloud, and Bittersteel was too clever for that. The Stormlands harbored similar resentments. The Marcher lords had spent lifetimes defending the passes against Dornish raids. Houses like Dondarrion and Swan had burial crypts full of men who died in those wars. Peace with Dorne felt like betrayal to them. Lords Peake, Bracken, Lothston, Butterwell, and Yornwood became early supporters. A network formed across the realm. Not an army yet, but the skeleton of one, waiting for the moment to add flesh and steel. Meanwhile, Sir Quentin Ball trained Daemon with religious intensity. Fireball was aging now, his red hair fading, but his skill remained deadly. More importantly, his belief in Daemon had become absolute. To Fireball, this was not about politics or ambition. Daemon was the rightful king, the true dragon, a man who should rule by merit. Fireball also trained Daemon's sons. The twins Aegon and Aemon showed extraordinary promise. At 10 years old, they moved like seasoned fighters. Watching them, Fireball saw generations of warrior kings, House Blackfyre ruling forever. each king greater than the last. He whispered to Daemon about legacy. What world would his 7 sons inherit? Would they remain eternal seconds, lesser men simply because of birth order, or would they be princes, kings, the rulers they were born to be? The greatest complication was Bloodraven. Brynden Rivers had become master of whisperers, a role perfectly suited to his talents. His spy network reached everywhere. Servants in great houses, merchants on trade routes, prostitutes in brothels, all reported to him. He called his agents the 1,000 Eyes, and one referencing both his network and his missing eye. Bloodraven knew everything about Bittersteel's recruitment. He reported every meeting, every sympathetic lord, every whispered conversation to Daeron, yet the king did nothing. Perhaps he believed kindness would eventually win Daeron's loyalty. Perhaps he feared acting too soon would turn suspicion into certainty. The hatred between Bloodraven and Bittersteel went beyond politics. At its center was Shiera Seastar, their half-sister and the most beautiful woman in the 7 kingdoms. Her mismatched eyes, one blue and one green, were said to bewitch any man who looked into them. Both half-brothers courted her openly. Bloodraven wrote dark, beautiful poetry about love and death. Bittersteel gave lavish gifts of jewels and captured tournament swords. Each tried to outdo the other in a competition that became court spectacle. Shiera accepted both their attentions without choosing either. She danced with Bloodraven at feasts, rode hawking with Bittersteel, smiled at both, and committed to neither. Whether genuine indecision or cruel entertainment, only she knew. This rivalry poisoned everything. When Bittersteel supported Daemon, Bloodraven naturally backed Daeron. Their personal war transformed every political question into another battlefield. Daemon himself remained torn. He genuinely loved Daeron, or wanted to. They had grown up together, played as children. Daeron had been generous, granting lands and honors. Everything Daemon possessed came from his brother's grace. But the whispers corroded that foundation. If Daeron was illegitimate, then who was the true usurper? These questions formed a maze with no exit, and the more Daeron thought, the more trapped he felt. His wife Rohan tried to pull him back to reason. They had 7 healthy sons, lands, respect, a good life. Why risk everything for a crown he had never sought? But Bittersteel countered every argument. The realm suffered under weak leadership. Dawn was consuming the kingdom. Daemon had a duty to step forward when needed. Most persuasively, Bittersteel spoke about the sons. What future did they have? Daemon II, Hadorn, Anis, and the others would grow up as minor lords, their Targaryen blood meaningless. But if Daemon claimed his rightful throne, those boys would be princes, their children would be royalty forever. By 195 AC, the support network was substantial. Great houses were involved now, not just knights and minor lords. Perhaps half the realm would declare for Daemon if he raised his banner. That was not a doomed rebellion. That was civil war with genuine possibility of victory. Yet Daemon hesitated. Civil war meant thousands dead, fathers against sons, brothers against sons, brothers against sons, brothers against sons. Could he justify that blood? Was any crown worth such cost? Fireball framed it differently. How much blood would be spilled over years of continued weak leadership? Sometimes the merciful choice was the violent one. Quick, decisive action before problems festered into something worse. In late 195 AC, the twins turned 12. Watching Aegon and Aemon train, Daemon saw himself at that age, saw their potential, and he imagined them as mere lords, never princes, never the leaders they were born to be. That vision broke something in him. Early in 196 AC, Daemon told Bittersteel, yes, not publicly, not yet, but yes, he would claim the throne if the moment came. Bittersteel immediately sent carefully worded ravens to all their supporters. Messages that committed nothing on paper, but communicated everything to those who understood. Prepare, gather arms, be ready. The realm felt the tension. War was inevitable. The only question was who would strike first. Daeron knew through Bloodraven's spies the king faced an impossible choice. Act and start the war, or wait and let Daeron choose the moment. He chose to act. He sent his Kingsguard to bring Daemon to court on charges of treason. That decision, meant to prevent war, guaranteed it. The Kingsguard arrived at Daemon's castle on a cold morning in early 196 AC. 3 white cloaks bright against grey sky, carrying the king's warrant. Daemon Blackfyre was commanded to appear before the throne to answer charges of conspiracy. Daemon received them in his hall, Blackfyre at his side. He read the warrant, his face revealing nothing. Bitter Steel stood to his right, hand on sword hilt, Sir Quentyn Ball to his left, eyes dangerous. The twins Aegon and Aemon watched from the back, already understanding what this meant. Sir Terence Toyne delivered the message with formal courtesy. Not an arrest, technically, just a summons. The king wished to discuss certain rumors. Daemon's attendance was requested. Everyone knew it was theater. Requested meant required. Discussion meant interrogation. Daemon could have agreed, gone to King's Landing, denied everything, talked his way out. He had broken no actual laws yet. Daemon did not want war. Daemon could have given him an escape. Sir Quentyn Ball destroyed that possibility. Fireball stepped forward, blocking the Kingsguard. His voice carried through the hall. My lord will not answer to an illegitimate king. Daeron may sit the Iron Throne, but he has no right to it. Not while the true heir stands here bearing Aegon's sword. The words were treason, spoken openly, undeniable. Ser Terence's hand went to his weapon. Stand aside, Fireball, or be cut down. Then cut me down, Fireball replied, drawing steel. But you go through me first. The hall erupted. Daemon's knights drew weapons. The Kingsguard responded. For one heartbeat, everyone stood frozen. Then steel met steel. The fight was brief and brutal. Fireball had numbers on his side. The 3 Kingsguard were skilled but outnumbered 20-3. Blood spilled on Daemon's floor before the white cloaks retreated, dragging a wounded companion. Daemon stood watching, Blackfyre still sheathed, as everything he tried to avoid became inevitable. Bittersteel grabbed his arm, pulling him toward the exit. They'll send an army next. We leave now. Word spread like wildfire. Across the realm, Daemon Blackfyre had defied the king. His men attacked the Kingsguard. The rebellion everyone feared was beginning. Bitter Steel shaped the narrative brilliantly. His ravens carried a different message to sympathetic lords. Daeron had tried to arrest Daemon without cause or trial, acting on Bloodraven's paranoid whispers. Daemon was forced to defend himself against a tyrant who feared his own brother. This was not rebellion but self-defense. Half the realm accepted that story, or pretended to. Within weeks, banners rose across Westeros. Lord Bracken brought the Riverlands. Houses Peake, Lothston, Butterwell, from the Reach, declared for Daemon. Lord Yarnwood and other Dornish houses opposing the Martells joined. Parts of the Stormlands rose. Even houses in the Westerlands, though not Lannister itself. Daemon could no longer stop this. The choice had been made, so he claimed it as his own. He stood before his gathered supporters and formally declared his right to the Iron Throne, not as usurper, but as rightful heir, son of Aegon IV, legitimized by royal decree, bearer of Blackfyre, the true dragon. His banner was unveiled, a black 3-headed dragon on red field, reversing Targaryen colors, not replacement but correction, a return to what the house should be. The realm split nearly in half. The great houses stayed loyal to Daeron, Stark, Arryn, Lannister, Baratheon, Tyrell, all answered the crown's call. But the sheer number of lesser houses joining Daeron was staggering, and crucially, the common people loved him. Small folk spoke of the Black Dragon with reverence, spreading tales of his prowess and fairness. Daeron responded with the Iron Throne's full might. The North sent men, the Vale sent men, Dorne sent 10,000 spears. The Lannisters mobilized Western wealth and power. And Daeron had Bloodraven, the pale spectre whose spy network had mapped every road, every castle, every wavering lord. Information was as valuable as swords, and Bloodraven controlled it absolutely. First battles were scattered skirmishes, raids in the Riverlands, clashes in the Reach, both sides testing strength and resolve, but everyone knew these were preliminaries. Sir Quentyn Ball proved as deadly in war as in the Yard. Leading Daemon's western campaign, Fireball struck Lannister holdings with devastating precision. He defeated multiple forces quickly. At the gates of Lannisport, he killed Lord Lefford in single combat, throwing the city into panic. Then he captured Daemon Lannister himself, the Grey Lion, taking the Lord of Casterly Rock prisoner. The feat was audacious, giving Daemon's cause enormous credibility. Daemon led the main army northeast from the Reach through the Riverlands toward King's Landing. His force grew as he marched. Lords who had waited now committed. Knights joined simply to fight beside the greatest warrior alive. His armies swelled to tens of thousands. Momentum belonged to Daemon. His victories were clean and decisive. His cause inspired passion Daeron could not match. Men fought for Daeron from duty. They fought for Daemon from love. He even began minting coins, a crucial sovereignty symbol. They bore his profile, and the Black Dragon, merchants throughout his territory, accepted them, acknowledging his kingship. For one shining moment, it looked like Daemon might actually win. The king who bore the sword. The warrior restoring Targaryen glory. Daeron made a desperate decision. He would not defend King's Landing from behind walls. That meant siege and suffering for small folk. Instead, he would meet Daeron in an open battle, one massive confrontation to settle everything. Bloodraven chose the location, an open field favoring neither side, where tactics and courage would decide rather than terrain. It had no name yet. After the battle, everyone would know it. Both armies converged in summer 196 AC, tens of thousands strong, the largest forces since the Dance of the Dragons, black and red facing crimson and black, brothers, fathers, sons, divided. The night before, Daemon walked among his men. He wore no crown, but looked every inch a king. He spoke to soldiers, thanked them, promised victory. They believed him. How could they not? His twin sons begged to fight beside him. They were 12, his age at knighting, skilled for their years, well trained by Fireball, but still children. Daemon should have refused, should have sent them to safety. He looked at their eager faces and said yes, they would stand with him when he claimed his throne. It was the worst decision he ever made. Dawn broke over the red grass field. Horns blew, banners snapped in wind. 60,000 men prepared to decide Westeros' future. And Daemon Blackfire, bearing the Conqueror's sword, rode forward to make history. The red grass field earned its name in the most literal way possible. By sunset, the grass would be soaked red with blood from thousands of dead. Before dawn, it was just another nameless expanse between the Reach and Crownlands. Daemon held the southern position. The Black Dragon banner flew from his command tent. Bittersteel commanded the right with Reach cavalry. Fireball held the left with his western army. In the center sat Daemon on a massive destrier, Blackfire at his side, his twin sons on smaller horses beside him. The royalist forces arrayed north. Prince Banbalor Breakspear commanded, facing his own uncle with a burden that must have crushed his soul. Prince Manuka led Crownland's levies. On a slight rise called Weeping Ridge, Brynden Rivers positioned his archers, the Raven's Teeth. Expert bowmen trained by Blood Raven himself. Dornish spears formed a solid block on the royalist left, 10,000 strong under Prince Meryn. They had everything to prove to their new king. Both armies stared across the field. The pause before history turned. The last moment when everything might be undone. But there were no emissaries, no offers of terms. This was beyond negotiation. The horns blew. The army surged forward. The initial clash was chaos. Thousands meeting in the center, shields splintering, swords rising and falling, men screaming. The sound shook the earth itself. Daemon held position, reading the battle flow, waiting for his moment. Great commanders knew when to charge and when to wait. Bittersteel's cavalry hammered the royalist right, driving them back. Reach knights hungry for glory charged repeatedly, breaking formations. For an hour, that flank belonged to Daemon. Fireball faced stiffer resistance left. The Lannister forces, despite earlier defeats, fought with discipline. They held ground, making every yard cost blood. The center ground into brutal stalemate. Men died in the grass, and still neither line broke. Then Daemon saw his opening. The royalist center was fully committed, unable to respond quickly. He turned to his sons, who looked at him with absolute faith. Stay close, whatever happens. They nodded, too excited for fear. Daemon raised Blackfire high. The Valyrian steel caught sunlight, seeming to glow. He roared and charged. 2,000 cavalry followed. The thunder shook the ground. This was the decisive gambit that would win or lose everything. They hit the royalist center like a lightning strike. Daemon was unstoppable. Every swing of Blackfire killed or maimed. This was not fighting, it was artistry. Men fell before him like wheat before the scythe. His sons rode in his wake, protected by his fury, watching their father become legend. The royalist center buckled. Men fled. Officers screamed orders, but fear is contagious. When you see death incarnate, courage fails. The line began collapsing. Daemon pushed deeper. He could see Bandlor's command position. If he reached the prince, the battle would end. Victory was within reach. The throne was within reach. Then Sir Gawain Corbray stepped into his path. A Kingsguard knight wielding Lady Forlorn, his ancestral Valyrian steel, one of the finest swordsmen alive. Not Daemon's equal, but close enough to matter. The battle seemed to pause around them. Men stopped to watch. Valyrian steel against Valyrian steel. Legend against legend. They fought for nearly an hour. Not quick, brutal exchanges, but an extended test of every skill they possessed. Gawain defensive, trying to tire Daemon. Daemon aggressive, but controlled, setting traps. Both were breathing hard, armor dented, bleeding from small cuts. Neither yielded. Finally, Daemon saw his opening. A faint high drawing Gawain's guard up, then a lightning low strike. Blackfire cut through armor into Gawain's thigh. The knight fell, unable to support his weight. Daemon could have finished him, should have kept moving while royalist forces reeled. The battle was his to win. But Gawain was wounded, defenseless on the ground, and Daemon believed in honor above all else. He stood over Gawain, protecting him from the chaos. He called for maesters. This man fought with courage. He will be treated with honor. Noble, chivalrous, and fatal. On Weeping Ridge, 300 yards distant, Blood Raven watched through eyes that missed nothing. He saw Daemon standing still, stationary, vulnerable, the opportunity that would never come again. Brynden Rivers had prepared his whole life for this moment. the best archer in the 7 kingdoms, perhaps the world. 300 yards was impossible for most men. Bloodraven was not most men. He whispered orders to the raven's teeth. Expert marksmen, all loyal, absolutely. They drew and aimed together. Bloodraven drew his own bow. Wood creaked. He sighted along the arrow, accounting for wind distance, the curve of earth itself. Some say he whispered prayer to old gods. Some say he smiled. He released. The raven's teeth released with him. Arrows arced high, then descended toward where Daemon stood over his fallen enemy. Daemon looked up. Perhaps he heard the whistle. Perhaps he sensed danger. He tried to move, raise his shield. Too late. Those seconds of mercy had doomed him. The first arrow struck his shoulder, then his side, then his neck. Accounts vary on the count. 3, some say 7. Others claim it does not matter. Any would have been fatal. Daemon Blackfire fell. Blackfire tumbled from his hand. He crashed into grass that would give the field its name. His sons saw him fall. Aegon and Aemon watched their father cut down by invisible enemies. They should have fled. The battle was lost when Daemon fell. But they were 12, and he was their father. They spurred forward, desperate to reach him, to protect his body, to do something. Royalist forces, seeing Daemon fall, rallied and surged forward. In the chaos, in the press of bodies and steel, the twins were overwhelmed. Accounts differ on how they died. Arrows, trampling horses, random blades. It does not matter. They died trying to shield their father. 2 boys barely old enough for knighthood, dead beside the greatest warrior in the realm. 3 generations of House Blackfire, killed in minutes. Bittersteel saw it happen from too far away to help. He screamed, pure anguish and rage. Then did the only thing possible. He gathered the other sons. Daemon II, 7 years old. Hagen, barely 5. Daenerys and the nameless younger ones, toddlers. He fought to where Daemon's body lay. The battle collapsed around him. But Bittersteel had one mission. He reached the corpse and pried Blackfire from dead fingers, the sword that defined a dynasty. Then he ran. A corps of loyal knights protected the children and carried Blackfire off the field. Behind them, the rebellion collapsed utterly. Royalists pursued, cutting down, fleeing men. Prince Badelor tried showing mercy where possible, but war has limits. By sunset, the red grass field was a charnel house, thousands dead from both sides. The grass was not red from sunset, it was red from blood soaking earth, pooling in low spots, staining everything. Daemon's body was recovered with his sons beside him, laid out with honor despite being rebels. Even Daeron recognized what was lost, not just enemies but family, not just warriors but legends. Bloodraven came down from Weeping Ridge, expressionless, red eyes unreadable. He had killed his half-brother. Kingslaying, the worst crime in Westeros. The stain would never wash off, but he had saved the throne. Whether the cost was worth it, no one could answer. The first Blackfire rebellion was over. Its echoes would last generations. Daeron II won his throne at Redgrass Field, but the victory was poison. The rebellion was crushed, yes, but the realm was shattered. Tens of thousands dead, families torn apart, hatreds that would fester for generations. The king's response was uncharacteristically brutal. Daeron, usually merciful and scholarly, became ruthless. Mass executions followed the battle. Lords who supported Daeron were stripped of lands and titles. Entire noble houses were destroyed overnight. Survivors were sent to the wall or taken as hostages. Children grew up in enemy households, constant reminders of failed rebellion. The message was clear: never again. But survivors remembered. Those who lost fathers, brothers, sons at Redgrass Field did not forget. Those who lost lands and titles nursed their resentment in silence. The bitterness did not fade with time. It grew in darkness, waiting for another chance. Bittersteel fled across the narrow sea with Daemon's surviving sons. Essos became their refuge. He gathered other exiles, sellswords and knights who had lost everything. Thousands of displaced Blackfire loyalists joined him in the free cities. Around 197 AC, Aegon Rivers founded the Golden Company, named for the gold and lands they lost in Westeros. It became the most famous sellsword company in the world. Their motto captured everything. Beneath the gold, the bitter steel, honoring both their lost wealth and their founder's name. The Golden Company was different from other sellsword outfits. Composed entirely of Westerosi exiles and their descendants, they never broke a contract. "Our word is good as gold" became their secondary motto. They were not just mercenaries, they were a kingdom in exile, waiting for the chance to return. And they remained loyal to House Blackfire forever. Some contracts are writ in blood. Bittersteel raised Daemon's sons in exile. Daemon II, the eldest surviving boy, grew up hearing stories of his father's glory, the greatest warrior who ever lived, the rightful king stolen by a kinslayer's arrow, the hero betrayed. These stories became religion to the boy. In 211 AC, 15 years after Redgrass Field, Daemon II Blackfire invaded Westeros. He was an adult now, trained by Bittersteel personally, commanding the Golden Company. The Second Blackfire Rebellion began with initial successes. Old supporters rose again, unable to let the dream die. But Daemon II lacked his father's brilliance. He was a good warrior, a decent commander, but not legendary. The rebellion failed. Daemon II was captured and executed. The dream should have died with him. It did not. In 219 AC came the Third Blackfire Rebellion. Aegon Blackfire, another of Daemon's sons, took up the cause. He invaded with the Golden Company, believing this time would be different. It was not. Aegon was killed in battle, another son dead for a crown that seemed cursed. The Fourth Blackfire Rebellion erupted in 236 AC. Daemon III Blackfire, grandson of the original Daemon, tried where his father and uncles failed. This rebellion barely began before it was crushed. Daemon III was killed. 40 years after Redgrass Field, the third generation was still dying for their great-grandfather's dream. Then came 260 AC and the Fifth Rebellion. The last one, Mace's Blackfire, called the Monstrous for his deformities and cruelty, was the final male line descendant. He led the Band of Nine, an alliance of sellsword companies, in what became the War of the Ninepenny Kings. They fought on the Stepstones, trying to establish a base to invade Westeros, and there a young knight of 17 cut down the last Blackfire pretender in single combat. Seer Barristan Selmy, who would become Barristan the Bold, killed Meleys the Monstrous. 64 years after Daemon Blackfire fell at Redgrass Field, his male line was finally extinguished. 5 major rebellions, countless minor uprisings, hundreds of thousands dead across 3 generations, all because Aegon IV legitimized his bastards, all because Daemon answered the call to rebellion. The cost to House Targaryen was catastrophic. Each rebellion drained resources. Each one killed loyal lords and created new enemies. Each one eroded trust in the crown. The dynasty never fully recovered its mystique after the Blackfires. The concept of rightful rule had been shattered. If a legitimized bastard could challenge the throne with half the realm supporting him, then the divine right of kings was just another story. The cracks Daemon created in the foundation would eventually bring down the entire structure. When Robert Baratheon rebelled against Aerys the Mad King in 283 AC, he was following a template Daemon had established. If you are strong enough, popular enough, if you can gather sufficient support, you can challenge any throne. Daemon proved that. He came within seconds of victory. The Targaryens never forgot that lesson. Neither did anyone else. Bloodraven's life was defined by that arrow he loosed at Redgrass Field. He served as Hand of the King for years, then as Lord Commander of the Night's Watch. Eventually he went beyond the wall and became the Three-Eyed Crow, living for over a century. The kinslaying stain never left him. People whispered about it wherever he went, but Brynden never showed regret. He had saved the realm from civil war, or so he believed. The fact that his action sparked 5 more rebellions was irony too bitter to contemplate. The Golden Company endured. By 300 AC, over a century after its founding, it remained the premier sellsword company in Essos, still composed of Westerosi exiles and their descendants, still remembering House Blackfire, still waiting though for what no one could say anymore. Bittersteel's legacy lived in every contract they honored, every exile they took in, every story they told of the king who should have been. The sword Blackfire vanished during the Second Blackfire Rebellion. Some claimed Bloodraven captured it. Others said it was lost at sea. Still others believed it waited in some hidden vault in Essos for the true heir. Valyrian steel does not rust or decay. Somewhere, that sword endures, the symbol of a dynasty that almost was. Daemon's 7 sons met grim fates. Aegon and Aemon died at 12 beside their father. Daemon II was executed after his failed rebellion. Aegon was killed in battle during the Third Uprising. Aegon's fate remains unknown, probably died in exile. The 2 nameless youngest sons disappeared from history entirely. Every one of them died young, or lived as perpetual rebels. Daemon had fought to secure their futures. Instead, he doomed them to war and exile. The irony was cruel. The man who embodied honor and nobility, who fought to give his sons royal destinies, cursed them to tragic ends. His choice to rebel, made from duty and love, destroyed everything he tried to protect. That is the true legacy of Daemon Blackfire. Not just the rebellion he started, but the century of blood that followed. One man's decision to answer the call of destiny condemned 3 generations to suffer the consequences. So why is Daemon Blackfire the biggest bastard in Westerosi history? Not for cruelty, not for evil, but for impact, for the sheer magnitude of change. One man's choice created across an entire century. Let's compare him to other famous bastards. Jon Snow was born a bastard, raised as one, believed himself one his entire life. He rose to Lord Commander of the Night's Watch, became king in the north, and was eventually revealed as a legitimate Targaryen heir. Jon saved the realm from the White Walkers. His accomplishments were extraordinary, but his impact was primarily in the north. His wars were defensive, not offensive. He never sought to overthrow a dynasty. He never split the 7 kingdoms in half. Jon's story is heroic, but it is not transformative to the entire realm's structure. Ramsay Bolton was legitimized by royal decree, just like Daemon. He was sadistic, cruel, monstrous in ways that still make people shudder. He destroyed House Stark temporarily, committed atrocities that earned him infamy. But Ramsay's impact was regional. He controlled the north briefly before being defeated. He left no lasting legacy beyond horror stories. His cruelty was personal, not political. He changed nothing about how Westeros functioned. The Sand Snakes, Oberyn Martell's bastard daughters, were skilled warriors who influenced Dornish politics. Gendry was Robert Baratheon's bastard, who was eventually legitimized. Edric Storm, Maya Stone, and countless other royal bastards existed throughout history. None of them come close to Daemon Blackfire. Daemon nearly overthrew the Targaryen dynasty. Think about that. The house that conquered and unified 6 of the 7 kingdoms, that ruled with dragons for over a century, that survived the Dance of the Dragons, almost fell to one legitimized bastard. Half the noble houses in Westeros declared for him. Not a small faction, not a regional uprising. Half the realm believed he should be king. That level of support is staggering. He was never defeated in battle until the moment he died. Every tourney, every combat, every military engagement he personally commanded ended in victory. His skill with Blackfire was legendary. Contemporary accounts said he was the equal of Aegon the Conqueror and Aemon the Dragon Knight. With a sword, he was the warrior himself, made flesh. But his military genius was just part of what made him dangerous. Daemon inspired fanatical loyalty. Men did not just fight for him, they died for him willingly, joyfully even. His cause survived his death by 64 years because people could not let go of what he represented. The Golden Company still honors his memory over a century later. Think about that level of devotion. Generations of exiles, born in foreign lands, raised on stories of a king they never met, remaining loyal to a cause that died before their grandparents were born. That is not just leadership, that is legend. The Daemon was legally legitimized by King Aegon IV. By law, he had a claim equal to Daeron's. He bore Blackfire, the sword of kings given to him by his father, in front of the entire court. He looked more Targaryen than the heir, with perfect Valyrian features, while Daeron appeared Dornish. The rumors about Daeron's parentage were widespread and persistent. What if they were true? What if Daeron really was the son of Aemon the Dragon Knight, and not Aegon? Then the bastard was more legitimate than the king. Then history chose the wrong victor. We will never know the truth. That uncertainty haunts everything. Daemon had 7 sons, a dynasty waiting to happen. Strong boys, all with Targaryen features, all trained as warriors. If he had won at Redgrass Field, House Blackfire could have ruled for generations. They had everything needed for success. One arrow from Bloodraven's bow prevented that future. The century-long shadow Daemon cast is his true measure. His descendants rebelled 5 times over 64 years. Each rebellion killed thousands, destabilized the realm, drained resources, created new hatreds. The Targaryen dynasty never recovered from the wounds those rebellions inflicted. By the time Erechi the Mad King sat the Iron Throne, the mystique of Targaryen rule had been shattered. People had seen that dragons could be challenged, that legitimacy was negotiable, that enough support could overcome any birthright. Robert's rebellion succeeded in part because Daemon Blackfire proved it was possible. The template was established. Gather sufficient lords, present yourself as the better choice, fight the war. Robert followed that path to victory. One bastard's rebellion in 196 AC created the conditions that ended Targaryen rule in 283 AC. That is impact on a scale no other bastard approaches. And here is what makes it tragic. Daemon was not a monster. He was, by most accounts, a genuinely good man, honorable in battle, fair in judgment, kind to defeated enemies. The moment that killed him, protecting Gwaine Corbray, showed his character perfectly. He valued honor over victory. That makes the story more painful. This was not some villain getting his comeuppance. This was a hero in the wrong story, fighting for what he believed was right, destroying himself and everyone who loved him in the process. Would he have been a good king? Probably. He had all the qualities needed. Military brilliance, personal charisma, a sense of justice, the ability to inspire loyalty. In many ways, he would have been a better king than Daeron. But we will never know. That uncertainty is part of his legacy too. The eternal what-if that haunts Westerosi history. What if Bloodraven had missed? What if Daemon had not stopped to help Gwaine? What if he had won Redgrass Field? The entire history of the Seven Kingdoms would be different. Different kings, different wars, different world. One arrow changed everything. That is how fragile history is, and that is how massive Daemon's impact was. No other bastard in all of Westerosi history created such enormous, long-lasting change. Not through cruelty, but through being exactly who he was. A warrior, a leader, a man who believed in duty and honor and family. The biggest bastard Westeros ever knew. Not who you expected when we started this story, but undeniably, absolutely, the answer. Daemon Blackfyre, the king who bore the sword, the Black Dragon, the legend who nearly changed everything. The central question that haunts this entire story is simple and impossible to answer. Was Daeron II legitimate? Aegon IV spent years spreading rumors that Daeron was not his son, that Queen Naris had been unfaithful with her own brother, Aemon the Dragon Knight, that the heir to the Iron Throne was actually a bastard himself. The evidence is circumstantial but compelling. Naris and Aemon were extremely close. Aemon died saving her life, taking wounds meant for the queen. They shared a bond that went beyond normal sibling affection, and Daeron looked nothing like Aegon. He had the dark hair and features of his Dornish mother, showing no trace of Valyrian ancestry. Meanwhile, Daemon was the perfect Targaryen. Purple eyes, silver hair, the warrior's build. Everything a dragon king should look like. If Daeron was illegitimate, then everything changes. The rightful king becomes the usurper. The rebel becomes the true heir. A century of Blackfyre rebellions transforms from treason into justified resistance. Bloodraven's arrow at Redgrass Field becomes the murder of the rightful king rather than salvation of the realm. But we will never know the truth. George Martin deliberately left it ambiguous. Naris and Anemone are dead. Their secrets died with them. History records Daeron as legitimate, but history is written by victors. The tragedy deepens when you consider Aegon IV's role. Literally, the worst king in Targaryen history. Corrupt, cruel, gluttonous, unfaithful. A man who turned the crown into a joke and the court into a brothel. Yet this monster of a father produced what might have been the greatest king the dynasty never had. How is that fair? How does the worst produce the best? The irony is almost unbearable. Aegon's deathbed legitimization was pure spite. He knew exactly what he was doing. Legitimizing all his bastards guaranteed civil war. He did not care. He would be dead. Let the realm burn. Let his sons fight over the ashes. It was one final act of cruelty from a king defined by cruelty. Daemon died because he was honorable. That might be the cruelest irony of all. If he had been ruthless, if he had finished Gwaine Corbray and kept charging, he likely would have won. The throne was within his grasp. Victory was seconds away. But he stopped to protect a defeated enemy. He valued honor over ambition. That nobility, that adherence to the code of knighthood got him killed. Westeros does not reward honor. Ned Stark learned that lesson a century later when his honor got his head separated from his shoulders. Daemon learned it at Redgrass Field when arrows found him because he refused to be less than chivalrous. The lesson is clear and bitter. In the Game of Thrones, honor is a weakness. Mercy is suicide. The good die young, while the ruthless survive. Bloodraven carried the burden of kinslaying for over a century. He killed his own half-brother. In Westerosi culture, that is the ultimate crime. Worse than murder, worse than treason. Kinslayers are cursed, damned, stained forever. But did Bloodraven make things better or worse? He saved the throne at Redgrass Field, yes, but his action did not prevent the Blackfire rebellions. It started them. 5 more wars over 64 years, all direct consequences of that arrow. Would Daemon as king have been worse than 5 rebellions? We cannot know, but the question haunts Bloodraven's legacy. Bryndon Rivers lived to be ancient, over 120 years old. He became the 3-eyed crow, able to see through time itself. Did he look back at Redgrass Field with regret? Did he wonder what might have been if he had let Daemon win? Or did he remain convinced his choice was correct, no matter the cost? We will never know his true feelings. He kept his thoughts locked behind those red eyes. Bittersteel's entire life was defined by his loyalty to Daemon. Aegon Rivers spent decades in exile, never returning to Westeros except to invade. He founded the Golden Company as a monument to his friend and half-brother. He raised Daemon's sons to continue the fight. All of this stemmed from his rivalry with Bloodraven. If there had been no love triangle with Shireen Seastar, would Bittersteel have supported Daemon so fanatically? Was this century of war ultimately about 2 brothers competing for a woman who loved neither? Personal grudges shape history as much as grand ideals. The War of the 5 Kings happened partly because Littlefinger loved Catelyn Stark and she did not love him back. The Blackfire rebellions happened partly because Bittersteel and Bloodraven both loved Shiera. Love and hate, jealousy and loyalty, these human emotions create wars that kill thousands. Daemon wanted to secure his sons' futures. That desire, completely understandable for any father, doomed all 7 boys. 2 died at 12 beside him. The others grew up as perpetual rebels, dying in failed uprisings or living hollow lives in exile. If Daemon had remained loyal to Daeron, his sons would have been lords, powerful, wealthy, respected. They would have lived full lives, married well, had children of their own. The bloodline would have continued peacefully. Instead, every single one met a bad end. The father's choice to rebel destroyed what he was trying to protect. That might be the most bitter irony of all. Questions remain that history cannot answer. Was Daemon power-hungry or duty-bound? Did he truly believe he was saving the realm, or did he convince himself to justify ambition? Did he love Daenerys, or simply want another wife to cement his status? Would he have been a great king or a disaster? Was his cause just or treasonous? Did Aegon IV genuinely favor him, or just enjoy creating chaos? Where is Blackfire now? Will a Blackfire pretender ever rise again? These questions have no answers, only speculation, only wondering. What we know for certain is this. Daemon Blackfire forced Westeros to confront fundamental questions about legitimacy and power. What makes a king rightful? Birth order or worthiness? Law or merit? Blood or ability? The answers are not simple. Perhaps there are no answers, only choices and the consequences that follow. Over a century has passed since that summer day at Redgrass Field. The grass grows green and peaceful now. Farmers tend their fields where 60,000 men once clashed. Children play where legends died. Time has softened the scars, though the memory endures. They say on certain nights, if you walk across that field when the moon is full, you can still hear the echo of steel on steel. The ghost of Daemon Blackfire, some claim, still fights his eternal battle, still charges with Blackfire blazing in his hand, still reaches for a throne that will forever elude his grasp. Perhaps it is just wind through the grass, or perhaps some battles never truly end. The sword Blackfire remains lost. Somewhere in the world, that blade of Valyrian steel endures. It does not rust. It does not decay. The sword of kings waits patient and eternal for whatever comes next. Maybe it lies in a forgotten tomb in Essos. Maybe it rests at the bottom of the narrow sea. Maybe Bloodraven took it and hid it somewhere no one will ever find. Or maybe, just maybe, it waits for another claimant, another dragon to wield it, another chance to change history. The Golden Company marches on, 10,000 strong, still the finest sellswords in Essos, composed of exiles and their descendants, men who have never seen Westeros but call it home nonetheless. They remember House Blackfire, they honor Bittersteel's legacy. They keep faith with a dream that died before their grandfathers were born. Beneath the gold, the bitter steel. Some contracts are written blood, words that echo across generations. What drives that loyalty? How does a cause survive when everyone who knew the original leader is long dead? Perhaps it is the story itself. The king who bore the sword, the warrior who should have won. The noble tragedy of a good man destroyed by his own honor. The stories have power, sometimes more power than swords. Daemon Blackfire's life teaches us lessons that resonate across the centuries. Birth does not determine destiny. A bastard can shake the world. The name you are given matters less than the name you earn. But his death teaches us something darker. Honor can be fatal. Mercy in the wrong moment means death. The Game of Thrones does not reward virtue, it rewards ruthlessness. Daemon was the greatest warrior of his age, and it meant nothing. One arrow from 300 yards away, loosed by a half-brother he probably loved once, ended everything. All that skill, all that training, all that legend stopped by a piece of sharpened metal and feathers. We are all more fragile than we want to believe. His 7 sons paid the price for their father's choice. That might be the saddest part. Daemon fought to give them royal futures. Instead, he cursed them to war and exile and early death. Every single one suffered because of what he did. The road to hell, they say, is paved with good intentions. Daemon intended to be a just king, to save the realm from weakness, to secure his family's future, and he destroyed everything he tried to protect. Yet we cannot quite call him a villain. He was too noble for that, too genuinely good. The accounts from his time describe a man of honor who treated enemies with respect and small folk with kindness, who valued chivalry and kept his word, who inspired love rather than fear. If circumstances had been slightly different, if that arrow had missed, we would remember him as one of the greatest kings Westeros ever knew. Instead, we remember him as the biggest bastard in history, not because he was evil, but because his impact was vast and terrible and beautiful all at once. The parallel to Jon Snow is striking. Another bastard with hidden royal blood. Another warrior with a Valyrian sword, another man thrust into leadership he never sought. The echoes are deliberate, George Martin meditating on the same themes across different timelines. What makes someone worthy to rule? Is it blood, ability, destiny, or just being in the right place when history turns? Jon and Daemon both learned that worthiness alone is not enough. You need timing. You need luck. You need those crucial seconds where everything hangs in balance to break your way instead of against you. Daemon's seconds broke against him, and the realm bled for a century because of it. The questions his life raised remain unanswered. Perhaps they are unanswerable. Perhaps that is the point. There are no simple truths in Westeros, no clear heroes and villains, just people making choices based on incomplete information and hoping for the best. Daemon chose rebellion. Daeron chose to stop him. Bloodraven chose to loose that arrow. Bittersteel chose decades of exile and war. Each believed they were right. Each paid a price. The red grass field sleeps quietly now. The dead rest beneath earth and stone. The survivors are gone. Their children are gone. Their grandchildren are gone. Eventually, every witness to those events faded from the world, taking their truths with them. What remains is legend, story, memory shaped and reshaped by each generation telling it. Some paint Daemon as a hero, the rightful king stolen by treachery. Others see him as a traitor who nearly destroyed the realm. Both versions contain truth. Both miss something essential. He was a man, flawed and brilliant, noble and destructive, honorable to a fault. That complexity makes him fascinating. That ambiguity makes him real. His story does not offer easy answers. It offers questions worth contemplating about duty and ambition, about honor and survival, about the price we pay for our choices and the legacy we leave behind. If you enjoyed this journey into the hidden corners of Westeros, into the stories history tried to bury, then subscribe. There are so many more legends waiting to be told, so many secrets the Meisters gloss over, so many truths buried beneath official histories. The realm has 1,000 tales like this one, and we are going to uncover them all. But for now, rest. Let the story settle. Let the weight of it sink in. The redgrass field is quiet. The dragons have flown. The swords are sheathed. The dead sleep peacefully under distant stars. Daemon Blackfire rests at last, his legend eternal, his impact undeniable. The king who bore the sword, the Black Dragon, the biggest bastard Westeros ever knew. Not who you thought when we began, but exactly who the realm needs to remember. Sleep well, legends, your story is told.